Studio Canal is releasing 2 movies about Donald Crowhurst in early 2018, and we will talk to the director of one of those movies. The first movie is The Mercy, starring Rachel Weisz and Colin Firth. In March 2018, Studio Canal will be releasing in the UK Crowhurst, a psycho horror film about the British sailors circling the South Atlantic Ocean as part of a hoax in the Golden Globe race. At the end, we will hear from Jennifer Appel, the Hawaii sailor who says she was adrift for 5 months in the Pacific Ocean, and she will tell us how she loves the story of the ill-fated Golden Globe race. First, let's hear from the director of Crowhurst, Simon Rumley. All right, so you said you started working on Crowhurst in 2014. Somebody showed you the script, and what did you think of it?
So basically, I was approached in 2014 by the producer Mike Riley, who's a friend I've known on and off for about since probably the mid '90s. And I didn't know. Well, I'd never heard of Donald Crowhurst then, but I read the script. I did some research, and I was fairly stunned by the story, and I kind of went from there, really. I think we were going to shoot it that summer, but I had another offer of a film that I accepted instead of Crowhurst. In the end, that didn't happen, so we kind of picked it up again in January of 2015 and kind of went from there.
And, what appealed to you about Crowhurst?
Well, it kind of felt like very much the flip side of the British Empire. The kind of daring do that summarizes, the British Empire and how we became, for that period in history, fairly dominant. And looking at our history, you would think that everything that every English person or British person set out to do, no matter how ambitious or crazy it was, that we succeeded in doing. And of course, that is not entirely the truth. And Donald's story about a man who had all the hope and desire and ambition to make this a successful trip. All the ambition was there, but the skill maybe was not, the preparation was not, and so things, as we know, took a tragic turn for the worst, really. So there's something kind of, which I thought kind of, in a way, symbolized our national, our country, and something also just, it was about a good man trying to do a good thing, but somehow failing, and through no fault of his own. Well, no, it's not quite, but through failing, and then it ultimately becoming, from good intentions, bad things arose, basically, and that's something which I think I've done in my other scripts and films, which I think is always a fascinating subject to explore.
So I guess I think one of the things interesting about Crowhurst is that he grew up in India, right? So he grew up in the British Empire's India.
Yeah.
And so before the 1968 race, do you look much into his background in the movie, or do you start right at the race?
Not the film, not at all. It was a relatively budget film, and I think trying to explore his childhood in India, that's more televisual series kind of territory, really. So he's obviously known for the race and for trying to sail around the world and failing to do that and then cheating. So we felt that was the core of the story. It'd be interesting to think, to really consider how much his childhood had an effect on the final outcome of what happened. And of course, the boy is supposed to shape the man. But I don't think there's much historical context or recordings of his childhood.
Right.
I know his family moved to England at a relatively early age, but I think between 5 and 10. And I know there's pictures of him dressed as a girl when he was younger, but that's about all I know of his history, to be honest, in India.
And So when the movie starts, does it start on the Tigmoth Electron? Does it start as he's starting to launch the boat? Where do you guys?
Well, the film physically starts on the Timothy Electron, yeah, when he's found out that he has become the de facto winner of the race. When I think the only other person who was left at the last stages was Nigel Tetly, but his trimaran was sunk as he tried to sail through a storm. So that's when we start, and then we have a flashback to how he, got the money, how he got the boat ready, and we flipped through that fairly quickly because, as I said earlier on, felt that the more interesting, exciting stuff was really him actually on the sea, on the boat, and struggling with the kind of limitations of the boat and also his own limitations as a sailor.
So
and then the guilt that he really goes through, really.
Yeah, so I think I read one account of the Crowhurst movie that it was kind of a psycho horror.
Yeah. So I think we're obviously very aware that there was a bigger budget film of the same story, and I think my background is more kind of psychological films and extreme dramas, as I call them, and we also had an executive producer by the name of Nicholas Rowe, who I don't know if you're aware of him, but he's a lauded British filmmaker who made some amazing films throughout his whole career, but specifically in the late 60s, early 70s, and he made Don't Look Now with Donald Sullivan and Julie Christie, which is based on a Daphne du Maurier ghost story, which is an amazing kind of existential horror kind of ghost story. He made The Man Who Fed a Worth with David Bowie, he filmed The Performance with Mick Jagger. He did another film called Bad Timing with Art Garfunkel, and he was very the 60s and 70s were really kind of a pioneering time in cinema because they kind of pushed many boundaries both in terms of structure and thematics, and so he was someone at the very forefront of that. So he was our executive producer, which is very exciting for me because I'm a massive fan of Nicholas Rhodes, and so in having him on board, we were very much encouraged to push the film into that psychological territory. And I think one has to remember is that whilst no one knows for sure what happened to Donald Crowhurst, the general consensus is that he jumped off the boat and committed suicide, which is of course tragic thing to have done, to consider and to kind of think of. But the question is, how did his mental state from being a seemingly happily married man with 4 children go from a man who wanted to commit suicide, and so within that, shall we say, degeneration, there's a great psychology as to what happened or why did it happen, and ultimately that is there is something very disturbing and horrific about that, because he didn't set off the journey with such intentions. He set off the journey to win. So it's so beyond the actual sailing that there's a very tough psychological story there.
I think I read one book about Crowhurst that argued that he had signs of manic depression. What do you think of that? In terms of the psychology.
Yeah, well, I think basically, what happened was at some point he realized that his boat was not strong enough to go around Cape Horn, Cape Good Hope, and the Roaring Forties and stuff, because he rushed the manufacture of his boat to actually set off in time, because the race, I think, was staggered over a period of 3 months, and you had to start during the period. I think it was from June. I can't remember. It was sometime during the summer. So his boat really wasn't as strong as it could have been, and he signed a contract with a financier who said that if he did not finish the race, he would have to pay back the money that the financier had invested into the boat. Now, the race the winnings were something like £5,000, and from what I can gather, the cost investment into the construction of the boat was nearer £10,000. So if he'd just decided that he couldn't finish the race and just pulled into land, he was then contractually obliged to pay this financier, a guy called Stanley Best, something in the region of £10,000, which meant that he would have had to have sold his house and probably his business would have gone bust. And as a father of 4 children and a husband, that wasn't something that he could really stomach. So I think the big problem was that so then he decided to cheat in this race, which again, in theory, was a cunning, obviously dishonest way to move forward, but in terms of survival, seemed like a pretty good way forward. But the other problem with that was that he then realized that he would have to sail in circles pretty much for 4 months to wait for the rest of the contestants to sail all the way around the world and then pick up the race around the bottom of Argentina, and he was going to follow them, come last, and wipe his hands of the whole journey. And I think during this period of time, he was not able to talk to anyone due to the positioning of his boat and the signals, where the signals from his radio would come from. So so he had to go silent essentially for 4 months. So he was basically sailing around in circles for 4 months with this guilt that he was cheating, with the guilt that he'd left his family. And I think that weighed increasingly, on his psyche, as you would imagine it would do on anyone, really, not being able to talk to anyone for 4 months, let alone when you have these grave concerns. So, in my mind, this is what, he essentially had a nervous breakdown, really. And it's, the ultimate tragedy is that if he picked up his radio transmitter then and managed to speak to someone, his wife, his PR agent, and maybe this would have been prevented. But he had his pride, and that never happened.
Yeah, certainly the isolation was really hard on all these men. Obviously, people know about Moitessier's abandoning his family and abandoning the race in his famous book, The Long Way. And Tetly, after he lost his home and boat, he committed suicide afterwards, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
It was I think it was a very hard thing for even people that didn't have a history of mental illness.
Well, and it should be stated that, as far as I'm aware, Donald Crowhurst did not have any history of mental illness before he left.
Yeah, I don't think it was diagnosed if he did, and that I think the author that argued it was arguing that he just kind of did some things that seemed grandiose before he left. So I've been interviewing these ladies who were rescued off Japan, and one of the things that they said to the reporters that where they said they were adrift for 5 months, they were, they had each other, and they also had the dogs with them, and that was a great mental help, which is something that Donald was lacking.
Yeah. And certainly, I haven't read his logbooks, but I've read snippets from them, and certainly by most accounts, the logbooks are increasingly illegible and lacking in sense, and even some of the recordings that he made, which we recreate a couple of them in the film. Again, they're increasingly lacking in real sense, to be honest. I think the interesting thing about
the way your movie is distributed is that it's picked up by Studio Canal, and Studio Canal is also making The Mercy, and they're going to be releasing The Mercy, I guess in December in France and maybe February in the UK.
Yeah.
What's the plans for the release of Crowhurst?
Well, they are releasing it in a very small theatrical version, I think in March. They are contracted with us to release it 2 to 4 weeks after the Mercy theatrically. So that's at this point, what will be happening, and then I guess it will go out onto digital platforms fairly soon thereafter.
So I think if you're thinking of watching The Mercy, you'll get kind of more a longer form view of the race and maybe of the preparations and his family, and maybe in Crowhurst you'll get more of the psychology on the boat.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen The Mercy. There are sections with the family, the 4 children, and the wife. So we do cut back and forth to them from time to time. But it's fair to say that the majority of our film takes place on the boat, yes.
Just off Argentina there. When did they end up, when did people discover that he visited Argentina? How long did it take them to find that out?
That's a good question. I'm not quite sure when that came out. I know that the funny thing was that they did not ask for his passport when they found him floating ashore, whoever found him. So whoever was doing their job didn't quite do it as well as they should have done. But hey, no surprise there. So I don't know if that was in his... I have a feeling that was in his records, in his logbooks, and I think he stated in his logbooks that he went he had to dock because his boat was sinking, and when he did dock, these I think a couple of life guards by the edge of the ravine that he stopped and found him. So I don't think they certainly did not know who he was. That they certainly did not know that he was in this race. And of course, back then, it's not like now where we have the internet and you can just discover things at the click of a at the tap of a keyboard. In reality, there was no sailors from Argentina. Things happened by post, or communications happened by post or telephone at best. So there's no real reason why they would have suspected him as being this competitor in this big race around the world.
I think the Golden Globe race in itself was kind of a weird construct that I think Crowhurst saw it as a race, but it was really, there were a lot of people that were leaving to do this trip. So after Sir Francis Chichester went halfway around the world in a boat, a lot of people were thinking, well, why don't we go all the way nonstop in a boat? And people like the eventual winner, Sir Robin Knox Johnston, has said in interviews that he left regardless. They started, the Golden Globe race was envisioned, what was it, by the Sunday Times? Is that who was the sponsor?
Yeah, that's right.
After he had already committed to go, and they just made the rules so that he was automatically a competitor.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of the Golden Globe race is that the Sunday Times sponsored Sir Francis Chichester, and they'd had way more interest in his journey than they had anticipated. And then I think when he arrived back in the UK, there were literally thousands of people, by the shore, welcoming him. Then when he was knighted by the Queen, again, hundreds of thousands of people turned out to that. And I think the Sunday Times realized that this was great PR for them, and so how to capitalize on that have another race. And of course, as you say, Sir Francis Chichester, he sailed all the way around the world, but he made a stop in Sydney. So the Sunday Times then decided, in their wisdom, that they would offer this prize. They would, like anything, push it to the next step. They would offer a prize to the first person to sail around the world single-handedly without stopping anywhere. And that's how this race differed from anything that had been before. And that's how it kind of was run up on Sir Francis Chichester. And Robin Knox was, I think he was, I have a feeling that Robin Knox was the first person to lead. And he never expected to win. There were two prizes in the Golden Globe. One was for the first person to cross the finishing line on the way back, and then the second prize was the person who did the quickest, who captured the quickest time sailing around the world, and that was a prize of £5,000, which is what Donald Crowhurst wanted to go for. And because the race was staggered over the first day possible, and still, and come first, and win that prize. But you could also then be the last person who actually left the race. But because you're the quickest, then you would win the £5,000 prize. So it's a bit confusing that there were two prizes. As it happens, Robin Knox Johnston won both of them because he was the first person to finish the race, and actually in the end he was the only person to finish the race. So he became the de facto winner of the £5,000 prize as well.
And didn't he give that to Crowhurst's family?
He did, yes, yeah. And something that we as filmmakers were keen to do, and I think kind of very much echoes his thoughts and his actions, is that I think somewhere he said, history should not judge Donald Crowhurst too harshly, and certainly, for all the bad things he did, we felt that essentially he was a good man following his dream, and that indeed he should not be judged too harshly. So, although we've detailed the psychological descent, in the end we've still done this with respect and kind of admiration for him, really. And what he tried to achieve, and actually what he did achieve, because he did sail, he didn't sail around the world, but he did manage to sail down to Argentina, which is no mean feat.
So why do you think so many people have caught on to this story? Why are we still talking about this 49 years later? Why is, there have been so many theatrical productions? I mean, for instance, Deepwater, The Mercy, and your Crowhurst film. Why is it still resonating?
Well, I suppose it's interesting now because, as you know, that they're relaunching the Golden Globe race again, and it's going to take place next year, I think in June. The contestants are going to leave from France rather than England, and there's been a lot of interest in that. And one of the things that's interesting about their competition is that even though the safety measures are a lot stronger, and there's still the ability to communicate if any of the sailors are in dire straits. The whole point of the race is to enter the race with boats that would have been applicable, and around in 1968. So there's something, I guess life has kind of speeded up very much so in the last 10, 15, 20 years with the advent of the internet, and suddenly, though 20 years ago seems old-fashioned, and as much as there was no internet, there were no mobile phones. So I think that this seems like one of the kind of last great challenges at that point in history when we didn't have technology as is today. Obviously going to the moon was one, which I guess the first man landed on the moon was it 69, I think, or maybe early 70s. but these are, man was still trying to break these boundaries, and I think more than anything, again, it's we're all confronted by nature, whether it's the weather, whether it's the sea, whether it's forests, whatever it is, and nature is still omnipotent and omnipresent, and I think there's something very much which goes to the core of what it is to be human, is to challenge yourself with and against and in nature, and that's essentially what he did. It was one man against nature, really. It was one man trying to use nature to his advantage and ultimately failing, and the failure meant that the stakes are very high with his failure, but I think it's something that we can all appreciate and understand, and there's something kind of romantic in the notion of what he did, but ultimately something incredibly tragic in the eventual outcome. So I think it's something that, whether it's sailing around the world, whether it's just going, climbing up a mountain, or skiing down a mountain, whatever it is, I feel it's something that we can all kind of understand, and both his hopes in achieving what he did, and also the failure in actually trying to achieve what he did and failing. So I think it still seems that there's it's very much at the core of the human spirit, really, what he did. And as I said at the beginning, it feels like with the British Empire as it was, everything was very easy. You'd do this or you'd do that and you'd succeed, and failure was not an option. But of course, failure, when you're trying to do something, no matter how big or small it is, not being able to do it is always an option. But it's so I think that's something which is also very resonant in his story.
So I think one of the more challenging things that people say about filming is to film a movie on the water, right? So everybody talks about how a big budget film Waterworld was, and many other films like that. How were you able to capture filming on the water with what was not a huge budget film?
Yeah. Well, we had a lot of discussions about how best to do it, and we were looking at shooting it in a water tank at one point. Then we were looking at using a green screen at another point, and in the end, it just seemed that the best and easiest way to do it was to actually go into the ocean and film it. And one of the reasons we could do this, what is essentially a low-budget film, is that it is a man and his boat at sea, and you don't. One of the great things is you don't need lots of crowds or extras. You don't need lots of locations or explosions or anything. So in the end, that's what we decided to do, and we shot in and around the Bristol Channel, which is actually quite tough because it has a massive tide. I think it's the second strongest tide in the world. So which we didn't know when we started off, but so that in itself caused a few issues. But we got around them, and I think it's certainly when we went on board for the first day, it took everyone a good morning to really get to grips with actually being on the boat and filming, and we'd had a practice in port, but we hadn't done anything out in a proper sea. So and in the end we were filming up to gale force 7. So that was pretty tough in itself. Not only was someone sailing the boat, but there was a cameraman, there was a sound man, there was a focus puller, there was the director, there was the actor, and then there were 2 people actually sailing the boat on what was not a big boat. So it certainly brought its challenges, and in the end, we were very lucky really with the weather, because it could have been that it was just like non-stop sunny, or it could have been non-stop raining. But I think we had 5 days of filming at sea, physically on the exteriors, and we managed to get everything from dead calm to force 7. So we were very lucky in terms of getting that mixture of weather, which otherwise would have been slightly kind of screwed really. And I think in the end, the other thing is when you're shooting on land and you're normally shooting, you have a shot list and you know what you need to get to make that scene work, and you tend to prepare for that and work towards that. But on sea, everything kind of goes out the window. So one of the things that I was careful to do as a director, which was really film as much as possible. So we try to film the scenes that we needed to film, but also, when the weather was wrong, we just filmed our actor Justin, who played Crowhurst, improvising stuff, whether it's just looking out at the view, or whether it was drinking or eating or singing or whistling or climbing up a mast or fixing stuff. So we shot as much as we could, so that when we did come to edit it, some of the things that we weren't able to film, we could somehow kind of get around in the edit.
And how did you find the Teignmouth Electron, the trimaran that you used for the filming?
Yeah.
How did you come across that, and how did that work out?
Well, we were again actually very lucky, because that was one of the things that we weren't really quite sure how we were going to work out. Was how to initially we had a bigger budget than what we ended up with, and we actually were going to get someone to recreate the actual Teignmouth Electron in its exact size and shape. But when our budget got cut, that went out the window. So actually our producer, Mike, managed to find someone who owned a 1969 trimaran. So although it wasn't, exactly what Crowhurst sailed in terms of, what we needed, it was as close as we were ever going to get. So the skipper was a guy called Charlie, and he was very amenable to letting us film on his boat. And yeah, we spoke to him about the historical detail of what would have been used then and what wasn't used then, and we changed his boat accordingly. And that was it. And that's obviously a seaworthy boat. So yeah, we were very lucky to find that, to be honest. And that made our lives immediately kind of easier than it might have done.
So what was the name of the Teignmouth Electron in real life?
Good question. I actually don't think I know, because I think I saw the boat once before we started filming on it. But as soon as we were there filming on it, it had a Teignmouth Electron. So yeah.
Okay.
I couldn't answer that one. Toughest question.
How many boats did you need to film it? Did you just film it on that boat, or you had several chase boats too?
No, we had one kind of safety boat for insurance purposes, and we had but that was it. And so the producer was in that boat with the safety team, and then the rest of the crew were on the main boat. And so again, it was a very small team, to be honest. And we considered using drones and stuff, but in the end felt that it wasn't that kind of film. And again, because it was more of a psychological film, we wanted to stay very close to, generally speaking, close to the action and the sailor and stuff on the boat. So yeah, I think probably we spent maybe 2 days filming from the safety boat, and then about 5 days filming on the actual exterior of the boat.
So, what were some of the problems that Crowhurst had on his boat that caused him to not go around the Cape of Good Hope?
I think the main one was the flooding. He had because the boat was rushed. I don't know why it was wrong, but my recollection is that the manufacturers had forgot to put a protective layer, or a protective water-resistant layer inside the actual hull of the boat. So the water was constantly seeping through, and there were screws loose all the time. there were wires hanging everywhere. So it was just basically not properly finished. But the main one was the fact that it was just going to sink. And I think one of the big problems was that he also there's a thing called a heliflex hose, which is kind of a bailer, which I guess all boats take in some water, from time to time, but you have bailers to help you get rid of the water, which would have made his life a lot easier. But he didn't even have one of these, so as far as we can work out, he physically had to manually throw all the water out, which there's no way if you're going to be going around massive storms in Cape Horn, be able to physically bail all the water out when you're still trying to sail and stay afloat and stuff. So that was pretty much the main reason, as far as I'm aware.
Okay. So when do you think the trailer is going to come out? When do you think maybe some pictures from the movie be available?
That's a good question. That's a question you'll have to direct to our distributors, Studio Canal. So that I'm afraid I can't answer. But as I said, the film should be coming out in March. So you would hope that they would have really getting that kind of stuff out now, really.
And the intended distribution is in theaters, not maybe TV, for instance. Here in the U.S., should we look for it in Netflix or Amazon Prime or something like that?
I think in the UK, I know Studio Canal have a distribution deal with Amazon in the UK, Amazon Prime in the UK. So as far as I'm aware, it should be coming out on Amazon Prime in the UK. In the US, again, I don't know what's happening. I think our sales agents have been talking to some companies in the US, but I don't think anything has been confirmed as far as I'm aware. But not everyone tells me everything, so I could be wrong.
Jennifer Appel, the Hawaii sailor rescued off Japan, loves the story of Donald Crowhurst.
There's a book called A Voyage for Madmen, and it was the very first around-the-world race. 9 men set out to do it, and only one came back. And being that's the basis for our understanding of what can happen out in the ocean.
Did you leave Honolulu in the Coronado?
Yeah.
Okay. Or Oahu. Did you leave Oahu?
Yeah, I did my first. I tried my first 30 days circling Oahu without touching land to see if I would ever be able to be a solo sailor, because I was really interested in what happened, A Voyage for Madmen, with Peter Nichols, and I wanted to know if those 9 people, if I had what they had, can you go away from land? And yet I didn't really want to get so far that I couldn't see. With larger boats, once I got used to crossing the channels, I was so ecstatic to be in a place where I could look back and wouldn't see anything but water.
Crowhurst's hoax was never revealed until after his boat was found drifting at the Atlantic Ocean. His logbooks told the story of how he had cheated in the race and had made a landfall in Argentina when he said he was rounding the Southern Ocean. It was his own writings, not the Argentinians who helped him repair his boat in the middle of the race against race rules, that revealed the fraud 4 months after his presumed suicide. Videos, subscribe and hit the bell notification icon so you can get notices of all our videos when they come out. This episode was brought to you by Mantis Anchors and Sailtimer Wind Instrument. Support the Slowboat Sailing YouTube channel on patreon.com/slowboatsail.